A push from Saskatchewan's Premier today to reduce interprovincial trade barriers. Scott Moe is urging his provincial counterparts to join the new West Partnership Trade Agreement. The agreement was set up in 2010 by Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC. Manitoba joined in 2017. All right, let's bring in Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe. Welcome, Premier Moe. Thanks for being here. Good to have you.
Thank you so much, Renee.
So why is expanding this agreement the right step to improving interprovincial trade?
Well, I think if you look at international trade, there's much going on in that space. Some of it predictable, but not very much of it. And so in light and as we try to find our way through our market access to those global markets around the world, it's incumbent on us to do our level best to reduce trade barriers that we have between our provinces. And you've seen that with various MOUs and reciprocal pieces of legislation that have been introduced. And those are all good steps. I would say a gigantic leap forward would be for the rest of Canada to join the four Western provinces in the most progressive free and open trade agreement that we have in the nation, and that's the new West Partnership. And that's what we'd agreed to offer at our Western Premiers meetings. And I thought going into our Council of Federation meeting, it was a time for us to just reinvigorate that offer and ask the other provinces to have a look at this agreement. It would be a great step forward for reducing trade barriers and labor mobility across our nation, making us truly competitive, not only within our nation, but make us much more resilient outside.
Now, work is underway by premiers across the country to reduce interprovincial trade barriers. The federal, the feds have done their part in trying to reduce these barriers. So what is the benefit of joining the new Western Partnership as opposed to just reducing trade barriers, every province for itself?
So the new West Partnership is actually the trade agreement that the Canada Free Trade Agreement was modeled after. And then there was a number of exemptions put in by various provinces and, yes, the federal government. We've seen the federal government and other provinces reduce the exemptions that they have in that broader trade agreement. But if they were to move forward with mirroring or signing on to the other provinces and territories signed on to the new West Partnership, and yes, we'd have to change the name to something much more national for sure. But it would be the next step in reducing even further trade and labor mobility barriers, regulatory differences that we have across the nation. It goes farther than the Canada Free Trade Agreement on all fronts, and would be not the panacea, but definitely a significant step forward for reducing interprovincial trade, labor mobility barriers that we have in this nation.
Now, this, of course, stemming from growing protectionist sentiment south of the border. What role do you see a stronger interprovincial trade bloc playing in buffering Canadian economies from potential trade shocks with the U.S.?
Well, it allows us a greater opportunity to purchase even additional Canadian products, and that's what we've seen in Western Canada. It allows us a greater opportunity to be much more competitive when we start to and continue to market our products abroad. And listen, exporting to the U.S. and to other countries that we're having very challenging conversations with right now. For Saskatchewan, China is paramount. For the ag industry, China is paramount, and our trade relationship with China is very important to the canola industry in particular, but also pork and pulses and others. We've run into trade challenges with them before, but this is an opportunity for us to, while we're continuing to work through those challenging conversations, clean up our own house and really reduce in a significant way the trade barriers, the labor mobility barriers, and any regulatory differences that we have in our nation. At times we have these challenges trading across Canada, and let's continue to take steps towards removing them as best we can. And the next obvious step is to expand that new West Partnership across Canada.
Which sectors in Saskatchewan stand to gain the most from a truly open interprovincial trade landscape? And are there sectors that could feel threatened by increased competition?
I think what you will see, and there definitely is a conversation about that when you enter the agreement. And Manitoba most recently entered in 2017, but the benefits far outweigh any of the challenging conversations that you might have. All the provinces have found that. And I think more collectively, when you look at it from a Canadian perspective, it does make us stronger. We get the opportunity to further buy Canadian products on all fronts. And we're we're building, mine sites and building value-added ag processing facilities, and building public infrastructure here in a way that really Saskatchewan hasn't seen in over a half a century or 70 years. And so we would just as soon use Saskatchewan or Canadian products wherever we can. But sometimes there's regulatory or trade nuances that just simply don't make those products competitive. And so it is a good, strong agreement, the strongest trade agreement that we have in Canada. It's the next logical step for provinces and territories to look at to make our Canadian economy more resilient, more unified, more aligned, and make give us help us get to a position of strength when we are looking outward to that global environment that we are going to continue to work with, to look to, and to export to.
Now, I do want to get your reaction to something else, and that is the Prime Minister's meeting with First Nations leaders today to talk about some of their concerns regarding the major projects bill. I was hoping to get your reaction to that. Are you optimistic that progress was made?
Quite optimistic with respect to the bill, which I think is a stopgap. We're legislating our way through what is a very challenging regulatory environment in Canada. And so we do need to work on more broadly on the regulatory process we have here in order to very much secure in the long term the opportunity for investment to flow into our nation and into our province of Saskatchewan. But the questions that are being asked by Indigenous leaders are fair questions, but the answers, I think, are also fair answers. There's no circumventing any process. And our experience in Saskatchewan has been that we're seeing companies now see the true value of engaging early with both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities in the areas where they're making the investment. And that value goes far beyond what is legally required in any duty to consult process or anything like that. And so there are successes that I think we can point to where there's been direct Indigenous investment in projects. We just had the Seven Stars Wind project in Saskatchewan, where there's a 30% direct Indigenous investment in that significant power generation facility. We're seeing procurement opportunities in the north, and a uranium industry, which is a Canadian uranium industry, because all Canadian uranium comes from Saskatchewan. That's employing 45 to 55% Northern and Indigenous residents in that industry and making uranium for globally clean nuclear power. So there definitely are positives, but we do need to remember, and companies need to remember, and governments need to remind everyone involved that we need to be inclusive and we need to build with the local community in mind. And we've seen that in Saskatchewan, not every time, but most times, and continue to see it in increased fashion. And I think that's what Bill C-5 will provide the opportunity with. And so credit to Prime Minister Carney and credit to the Indigenous leaders for opening up the discussion. And I am optimistic that we'll find a way, not only for Bill C-5 to move some projects forward, but for us to make some modifications to the regulatory environment we have in Canada so that we can truly become inclusive, the strongest economy in the G7, which is an aspiration of the Prime Minister, but also to become a global energy superpower, which is also an aspiration by the Prime Minister, an aspiration, I think, of ours and most Canadians.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining the program, Premier Moe. That is Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan.
Thank you.